with us, and of course my colleague, Senator Michael Bennet, and Sarah LaFrenz, who is a mom and a Kansas State employee, and we're so pleased to have Representative Sherry Bustos with us as well, because this is certainly an effort that our House and Senate Democrats are deeply concerned about in terms of the direction of the Republican tax plan. We're here today to discuss the GOP's tax giveaway plan. We're still analyzing the bill, and my colleagues will have more information at the 2:30 press conference today. And as I indicated, it's great to be joined by my colleagues and two people from Kansas who know from personal experience just how damaging trickle-down tax schemes can be. Now, let me first say that we need tax reform that helps small businesses, creates jobs, puts more money in the pockets of middle-class families in Michigan and across the country, closes tax loopholes that are taking jobs overseas. We want to work in a bipartisan way to do the right kind of tax reform. But that's not what is being proposed. You know, too often we think of tax policy as sterile numbers on a spreadsheet. In reality, it's about people. The Republican tax giveaway plan suggests that they care more about people who are part of the wealthiest 1% of Americans than anyone else. We're still getting up to speed on the House Republican bill, but we do know this. It does provide another huge tax giveaway to the wealthiest among us. It explodes the deficit. Any help to middle-class families is taken away in 5 years, it appears, and it threatens Social Security and Medicare. Instead of bipartisan tax reform, Republicans are serving up the same trickle-down nonsense that happened and failed in Kansas. In 2012, Kansas provided huge tax giveaways for the wealthy. The state Republicans in charge said that economic growth would make up for the lost revenue. It didn't. Schools closed, construction projects were delayed, and middle-class families paid the price. A majority of Republicans and Democrats in the state legislature stood up to the governor and repealed the harmful tax giveaways in 2016. It's not just Kansans who know that trickle-down economics doesn't work, though. Let me just say that yesterday in a hearing that we had with the Democratic Policy and Communications Committee, Bruce Bartlett, who is an economist who worked with then Jack Kemp, helped create what's now known as supply-side economics. He later worked for Presidents Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush. And here's what he said in opposing what is now being suggested. He said, while the theory had some usefulness in the 1970s and 80s, Bartlett said, he now calls it, quote, nothing but dogma completely divorced from reality. As he said, and I quote, virtually everything, this is Bruce Bartlett, virtually everything Republicans say about taxes today is a lie. Tax cuts and tax rate reductions will not pay for themselves. They never have. Republicans don't even believe they will. They are just excuses to slash spending for the poor when revenues collapse and deficits rise. Pretty strong words. He added, having helped open the Pandora's box of Republican tax cutting, I've tried for many years to close it again. I'm trying again now. As I indicated, we want tax reform. We want to do it in a bipartisan way. We want to create jobs and grow the economy and put money in the pockets of middle-class families. That is not what the Republican proposal does. I now want to introduce the State House Minority Leader of Kansas, Jim Ward, who's been on the front lines. And thank you so much for yesterday coming and being a part of our hearing.
Thank you, Senator, for the opportunity to address this very important topic. Let me make it clear at the beginning that Kansas tax experiment was an utter and complete failure that almost bankrupted our state. It was fiscally irresponsible, fundamentally unfair, and it caused devastating effects across our state. Fiscally irresponsible in that we had 3 credit score downgrades in 3 years for the first time in our state history. We missed budget revenues by almost $1 billion a year for the 3 years the plan was in effect. Fundamentally unfair, we told 330,000 of the wealthiest Kansans individuals and businesses that they no longer had to pay income tax in Kansas, while all the rest of us had to pay more. More in sales tax, more in property tax. We even pay more to tag our vehicles, cars and trucks in Kansas as a result of that. And devastation. When we opened schools this year, we were short 1,500 teachers because teachers no longer want to make Kansas their home for their career. We have bigger class sizes. Our test scores flattened out. We had schools that had to cut the number of days, the number of hours. We have highways and road projects not getting done. We had a prison riot, 2 prison riots last summer. And what was the most appalling, because it hit home so close, the department in charge of protecting our abused and neglected children lost 74 of those children last year. Now you say, well, why are you talking about Kansas? This is a much bigger pie, different. It isn't. If you listen to the language that the president used just the other day, a jolt to the economy. Governor Brownback, when he pushed his plan, talked about a shot of adrenaline to the heart of the Kansas economy. You can't hear a Republican talk about this plan. It doesn't say it's a jobs plan. It will grow jobs. Our governor promised that we would have 25,000 new jobs within 4 years. It didn't happen. We finished 48 out of 50 states in job growth for 1 year and 49 out of 50 another year. And Kansans don't like finishing 48 and 49 in anything. It didn't work. It won't work here. And here's the other thing. Kansas is a very small economy compared to the U.S. economy, which is a massive worldwide driver of the economy. You crash the U.S. economy, you're going to crash the world economy, and you can have devastating impacts across the world. Beware. The Kansas case study says beware. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And one of our distinguished Finance Committee members, Michael Bennet.
Couldn't come, so Michael Bennet came today instead. Thank you, Debbie, for organizing this. President Trump has asserted that tax reform should mean, quote, more jobs, higher pay, and lower taxes for middle-class families, and, quote, ensure that the benefits are focused on the middle class, working men and women, not the highest income earners. These goals sound exactly right to me. And although we haven't had a chance to read the entire bill, I am deeply concerned that the House Republican bill may end up doing exactly the opposite of what the president said he wanted on the campaign trail, lavishing tax cuts on the wealthiest Americans at the expense of the middle class and increasing deficits that will slow growth and lead to deep cuts in Medicare, Social Security, and Medicaid is not what we need right now. No good evidence supports the notion that huge giveaways at the top eventually trickle down to everyone else. I'm a little worried that part of the problem you faced in Kansas was that your governor may have learned his math in Washington, D.C. And it's important at a moment like this, at an inflection point like this, to remind ourselves of the history. And the history here is that Bill Clinton left his successor a $5 trillion surplus over the next 10 years. And George Bush said that he was going to give that money back to the American people. He did so. Tax cuts in 2001, tax cuts in 2003. By the time President Obama showed up, there was not a surplus. There was a massive deficit, massive additions to our debt, 2 wars that were unpaid for, and an economy that was tanked because of that supply-side economics. And it took them 10 seconds to blame President Obama for a deficit that they had created. And now here we are playing exactly the same movie again. These are the wrong priorities. They were the wrong priorities in Kansas, which was described to the American people as something that would be an example for the rest of the country. We're hearing today from Kansans that is not much of a good example. And we know it's a perfect example of what happens when false promises about the massive magic of tax cuts for the wealthy meet with reality and math. And after the misguided tax plan passed, the Kansas economy stagnated. Job creation lagged behind. The state was downgraded, as Jim mentioned, and services were slashed. The same people that are offering this proposal, by the way, are the people that got the U.S. debt downgraded for the first time in American history over the last 10 years. I hope that our Republican friends will abandon this partisan, misguided approach to tax reform and work with Democrats on real, lasting reform that would spur job creation, grow paychecks, actually help small business, help lift people out of poverty, and better allow people in the middle class to afford child care and higher education and housing and health care. That would be a plan that we could get behind. Thank you, Debbie, for having me.
Thank you, Senator Bennet. And Sarah LaFrentz, who is with us as well from Kansas. We appreciate you coming.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having me here today. My name is Sarah LaFrentz, and I'm from Topeka, Kansas. I'm here today as a private Kansas citizen, and I want to talk to you about a very similar tax plan that was signed into law by our governor, Sam Brownback. What happened in Kansas is a deeply personal story for me, because every single person that I know was affected by this plan. As a mom of 3, I have seen firsthand what this experiment has done to the people of Kansas. Just weeks ago, on October 10th, news broke that more than 70 children were missing from Kansas, according to the companies contracted by the Kansas Department of Children and Families to run the state's foster care system. The state of Kansas literally lost children because they decided to trim spending in this way. Our schools, for example, school districts have been forced to eliminate programs, lay off staff members, and even shorten the school week. Kansas schools are so underfunded that the state Supreme Court has ruled that the Republican-dominated legislature had not abided by its constitutional mandate to finance public schools equitably, especially in poor districts of our state. I am here today to implore you to learn from the failed experience of Kansas. When lawmakers decide to starve public services in order to give tax cuts to the most wealthy, people's lives are endangered, harmed, and irreparably harmed, and sometimes even lost altogether. I thank you very much for this opportunity to share these stories with you today.
Thank you so much for being here, for making the trip, for both of you. And now we have Congresswoman Bustos, who is one of the co-chairs of the House Policy Committee, and we're so glad you're here.
Thank you, Senator Stabenow. You started out by talking about that tax reform is about people.
Yes.
Sarah is the example of what has gone wrong with flawed tax policy. So I want to thank Senator Stabenow for calling us together for what is a middle-class tax hike. I mean, that's really what we're talking about here. And this is what the Washington Republicans just introduced. It's a middle-class tax hike. I'm from the heartland. I represent downstate Illinois. When I'm at home and I wake up, I look out my window and I see the Mississippi River. That's the area I represent. And we have the kind of families that when you walk down the street, Sarah, you can relate to this. You're a Midwesterner, Senator. You're a Midwesterner. But when you walk down the street and you look somebody in the eye and you tell them that you're going to do something, we expect that people are going to do that. And so when Paul Ryan and Mitch McConnell looked Americans in the eye and said that they are going to promise a tax reform package that would create jobs, well, that's what we in the Midwest expected. But obviously, what we're learning today is that is not what this bill does. Their bill really is a shell game. That's what we're looking at here today. It's a shell game that raises taxes on hardworking middle-class families. And this is at a time when the Dow Jones is breaking records, that we've got too many great big American corporations that are exploiting the tax loopholes where they're not paying their fair share. So do Washington Republicans really believe that we need a massive tax break for the ultra-wealthy that are paid for by people who are already struggling? Do they really think that we should eliminate deductions for student loan interest, for medical expenses, and even for adoption? That's what's in this bill. Do they really think that it's fair to get rid of the alternative minimum tax that would have saved Donald Trump more than $25 million on the only tax returns of his that we have been able to see back in, 2005? Their plan does nothing to stop the outsourcing of good-paying jobs. And this is something that we in the Midwest can relate to. We've seen corporations and jobs go to Mexico and China time after time after time. So this means a great deal to the people that we represent. So why are the Washington Republicans doing this? because it appears to us that they think that the ultra-wealthy need a tax break more than our hardworking families do in our regions. Because they think that folks who are making record profits on Wall Street deserve more. And because they think their failed Trump Care scheme that Washington Republicans are continuing to focus on, and they treat us back home like we're flyover country. So we've said it from the start that we need tax reform. I think we've all reiterated that. We're in favor of tax reform, but we need it in a way that's going to put hardworking Americans first. We will be the first to admit that there are some provisions in this that we can work with, but that ought to be the starting point. Let's start with areas that we can work together on. And then as we look at this, though, we know that this is a shell game. Their plan means this: middle-class families will be paying more while they're getting less. It will bring the failed Kansas experience that we've heard about today to a national level, and we can't let them do that. So that's why we're here to talk with you today. That's as we see it this early on. And with that, I will step aside so Senator Stabenow can lead our Q&A.
Thank you so much. Happy to take questions.
Senator, they called the second vote.
Okay, we'll take a couple questions. Okay. Yes, yes.
Has the Kansas delegation shown any interest in looking at this, and the Kansas congressional delegation? Do they seem to be worried that we're going to lose the same states here?
That's a really good question, and I can't answer that yet. I mean, I'm certain that they have heard from their constituents, and the fact that the majority of the state House and Senate, and the majority is Republicans, and certainly our leader, Jim Ward, can answer this. But I would just assume from afar that because the majority of the state House and Senate, Republicans and Democrats together, overrode Governor Brownback's veto and put back all of the misguided tax giveaways that had been given, that the people of Kansas certainly seem to have spoken.
Thank you, Senator. The language they've used in newspaper articles send sense that they are supportive, but here's the fact that I think may slow them down a little bit. In a state that voted for Donald Trump with 57% of the vote, we flipped 13 ultra-conservative seats from ultra-conservative to Democrat. And the only issue in the campaign was, do you think the tax experiment is working? And Kansans overwhelmingly said no.
All right. Yes, yes, sir.
Does your party expect to release its own tax reform plan?
Well, our hope is that we will see, as I can tell you as a senior member of the Finance Committee, that we're hoping that the chairman will make a decision to work with us on a bipartisan approach. That would be the best thing. We've spent the last 2 years in working groups in the Senate Finance Committee, Democrats and Republicans. I co-chaired one with Senator Enzi, preparing to do bipartisan tax reform. And then with the new administration coming in January, all that stopped. So we're very hopeful, we're encouraging that the Senate Finance Committee do what we have done in the past. Put this aside. This does not make any sense. And instead, let's work together and get something that actually does put money in the pockets of middle-class families and grow the economy. Thanks very much. Thanks, you guys.
Thank you for letting me do that.
I'm glad the fact.
Yeah.
You know, but we're constantly running, so.
Thanks, Senator. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Good job, Sarah.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
thanks
It was
for
really
being
nice to
here.
meet. You know, my dad went to the U of I.
Okay, very good. Good Illinois connection.
Yeah.
Thanks, Jim. Appreciate it. Hi, how are you doing? Good.
Good to see you.